The first thing I noticed was how wrong the silence felt for the time of morning. Not quiet exactly, but thinned out, like the world was holding its breath. And I remember standing at the bus stop with my backpack slung over one shoulder, watching my reflection ripple faintly in the scratched plastic of the shelter wall, thinking about how I should have left the house a minute earlier, how I hated being rushed, how none of that mattered because it was just another school day and nothing bad ever happens at the bus stop. That sense of normalcy was so strong that when someone stood beside me, I barely reacted at first, assuming it was just another student, another body filling space, until I noticed they were standing a little too close enough that I could feel the warmth of their jacket through my sleeve, and when I glanced over, I saw it was a guy I recognized, but I didn't know well. Someone I'd seen around school enough times that his face didn't register as unfamiliar. Someone whose name I couldn't place, but whose presence felt explainable. Then he nodded at me like we'd already spoken that day, smiling briefly before looking back down the empty road. That smile stuck with me because it wasn't creepy or forced, just like practiced. Like he'd used it a lot. Then we stood there for a few seconds in silence before he spoke, asking if the bus was late. I shrugged and said probably, because buses are always late. And that should have been the end of it. A meaningless exchange between two people killing time. Except he didn't go quiet afterwards. He kept talking. Not about anything strange, just, classes, how early it felt, about how dead the street looked, and I responded basically automatically, half listening, half lost in my own thoughts. Until I realized he was saying things slightly out of order, referencing classes I didn't share with him, schedules that didn't line up, details that were close enough to feel right, but wrong enough to catch on the back of my mind. I remember feeling that faint itch of discomfort then, the kind you brush off because correcting someone feels rude, because it's easier to nod than to ask how they know something, and when the bus still didn't come after several more minutes, he suggested we walk instead, saying it'd be faster if we cut through a shortcut behind the old shopping strip. I hesitated. Not because it sounded dangerous, but because it sounded unnecessary. And still I agreed, because again, saying no felt like overreacting. We started walking side by side down the sidewalk. Morning air cool and damp, our footsteps echoing softly off of closed storefronts. And as we walked, he stayed just a half a step behind me, close enough that I was always aware of him. And he kept talking, asking questions that weren't invasive but felt like weirdly specific. Like how long it took me to walk places, whether I ever skipped first period, whether I usually walked alone. And each time I answered vaguely, my stomach tightening without me fully understanding why. And when we reached the narrow path behind the strip mall, the one overgrown with weeds and scattered trash, he slowed and said it was quicker this way. And something about the way he said it made it sound less like a suggestion and more like a confirmation. I stepped onto the path with him, telling myself I was being stupid, that plenty of people use this route. That daylight made everything safer. And still that feeling wouldn't leave. And a few steps in, I noticed he'd stopped talking. The silence stretching between us until it felt deliberate. And when I glanced back at him, he was looking at his phone, thumb hovering like he was waiting for something, and then it buzzed. He smiled again, that same practiced smile, and said, "Okay, keep going." I stopped. The words landed wrong. They weren't rude, but misplaced? Like he'd skipped a line in a script. I asked what he meant, and he laughed lightly and said nothing, just that we should hurry. And that's when I noticed something else. Something small but impossible to ignore, which was that the path ahead of us curved out of sight. But the fence to our right was solid, tall, unbroken, and the building to our left formed a wall, and the space suddenly felt less like a shortcut and more like a corridor. I slowed, pretending to tie my shoe, watching his legs from the corner of my eye as he stood there. Waiting. Not impatiently, not confused, just waiting. And when I straightened up and said I thought I'd go back the main road instead, his expression didn't change, but his tone did. Less casual. As he said there was no point, that it would take longer, that we were already halfway through, and something inside me clicked. It wasn't panic yet, but awareness. The realization that he was guiding me, not walking with me. And I took a step backwards, testing the space, and he stepped forward to match me. No aggression, just enough to keep the distance the same. And I felt my heart start to race. The sound loud in my ears, and I said I'd forgotten something, that I'd need to go. And he sighed, like I'd inconvenienced him, and he said, "Just wait here a second," and turned slightly like he was about to step away. And I would have relaxed if not for the way he positioned himself, blocking the narrowest part of the path without seeming to. And before I could respond, I heard movement ahead of us. Footsteps crunching on gravel, and another figure emerged from around the curve. Someone taller, broader, their face shadowed by the angle of the buildings. And they stopped when they saw me, glancing at the guy beside me. And then that look they exchanged was fast. It was subtle, but it was there. A look of confirmation, of alignment. And the second person shifted to stand further down the path. Not approaching, not leaving, just taking up space. And that was when fear finally hit, hot and immediate, because the picture snapped together too cleanly. The late bus, the suggestion to walk, the questions, the timing, the corridor of walls on either side, and I realized I wasn't being accompanied. I was being funneled. My body reacted before my mind finished processing it. Adrenaline surging as I turned and bolted back the way we'd come, not caring anymore about politeness or explanations. My backpack bouncing painfully against my spine, my breath coming in sharp gasps as I ran, and behind me I heard them shout. Not words I can make out, just sounds, just urgency, and footsteps pounding after me. Faster than I expected, closer than I wanted. And I pushed harder, lungs burning, legs screaming, bursting out onto the main road where cars passed and people stood waiting for buses. I didn't stop running until I was in the middle of them, my heart hammering, hands shaking, and when I finally looked back, they were gone. The path empty, the shortcut looking harmless again like it always had. People around me glanced over briefly before going back to their phones, their conversations, their normal mornings. I was still shaking, trying to slow my breathing, realizing how easily it could have gone differently, how close I'd come to staying quiet, to just following instructions, to trusting someone just because I'd recognized their face. And even now, thinking back on it, what scares me most isn't that they chased me, it's that they didn't look surprised when I ran, like running had always been one of the expected outcomes. Just not the one they'd hoped for.